You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Hey, welcome back to another exciting edition of Shoe and Show, the Footwear Industry's Business and Trade podcast. We've been doing this for over 6 years now, and it just keeps getting better, to be honest with you. I'm super biased, but I'm going to go with it. You know, today we are going to listen in on a conversation that we had in New York at our sourcing summit over the summer. And sometimes we do this, sometimes we don't, but this is a conversation I thought was so important to where the industry finds itself from a sourcing perspective currently and where we think we're headed. And it was from 4 really top-notch executives within the shoe industry. And so you're going to listen in on a conversation that was moderated by Jim Zwiers, who's Executive Vice President of Wolverine Worldwide. And he has a conversation with Jung Yoon, who's from Michael Kors, Ronnie Robinson from Designer Brands, and Tom Iredale from Jones & Vining about all the different things that are impacting supply chain and footwear sourcing as we sit here at the end of August in 2022. And you will get some great insights. It's a little long. We don't usually run them this long, but I got so much great feedback. Someone said to me in the room that day, I could have listened to them speak all day long. And so we wanted to take that opportunity to provide this audio to you in a way that you can, if you didn't have a chance to join us that day or you just want to relive the moment, you can listen in on this episode. So with that, we're going to let Jim Zwiers take it away.
It's my privilege to share this panel today with a number of distinguished colleagues. So Jung, Ronnie, and Tom. We have got an approach here that I think you're going to find enjoyable. You're going to hear a bit from each of us. We might have a little bit of time at the end, but we'll keep it a little bit lively and we'll just kind of jump in. So first, let's just start with something to kind of set the stage for everybody, maybe just to jump in. So in a word or two, how would you describe the current sourcing environment and supply chain environment for each of your respective countries or companies?
Want me to start?
Tom.
Yeah, okay. So at Jones & Vining, we basically have 2 business sectors. We have our last business and our open cell foam Perfex business. Our last business has been pretty stable. We manufacture in 3 different locations, China, Vietnam, and Indonesia. We use one source for all of our HDPE material. It all comes out of Taiwan. So that has been very easy to manage. We place orders every other month and draw from those orders on a regular basis. The Perfex business has been a little bit more challenging. We have numerous materials and supplies that we use for our Perfex product. So we've tried to encourage our suppliers to have more local supply chain within where we're manufacturing our products. So as we grow that business and we become more meaningful with our suppliers, they're putting those products in the locations where we're manufacturing.
That was great. Ronnie?
So I've been doing this for 35 years, and I don't think I've seen anything like the last 3 years. This is unbelievably unprecedented situation in both sourcing and supply chain. I know you said 2 or 3 words, so I'll leave it there. So
that's right. All right, that's great. Jung?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Jim and Ronnie, but also I wanted to say that it's continuing to be unpredictable as it had been for the past 2-3 years. And I say unpredictable because we feel that every day, every week, there are different challenges that we had not expected. And most of the challenges are coming from more macro, geopolitical, economically driven than the product in particular we're designing and producing in the market. So I think this is a very unique challenge and the learning in a sense that the challenge comes from not only the competitors, but really from everywhere that's beyond our scope of control. And as an executive of supply chain, we had to contend with that, right? Beyond what we had been used to managing. So I think that's continuing to happening. And that's how I would describe it. Unpredictable and macro, geopolitically driven.
For sure. And I think those non-controllables for all of us, we used to win or we used to lose, but it generally was up to us and our teams, right? How did we do with our product or how did we do with our sourcing? So I think that's a really great point. So let's pull on that one a little bit. So with all the challenges in the last few years, what are the top 2 strategies you deployed to survive the tumult of the sourcing supply chain that we found ourselves in? So Jung, maybe back with you, a couple of things that you guys employed.
Sure. I think the first thing is to constantly reevaluate what should be the strategy. I think if the sourcing and supply chain had some formulas for the past, I don't know, whatever decades, I think that norm has been changed multiple times over the past couple of years based on the challenges. So as we're continuing to face different challenges, the strategy is really to reevaluate constantly what the new challenges are. What are the data telling us? What are the new trends? What are the information I should be paying attention to? So it's really the strategy of really trying to pay attention to everything about our consumer, the market, trade agreements, geopolitical tensions and such, commodity price, oil price. So there's so many elements, but I almost feel like managing supply chain, I'm paying more attention to the global news than the product information itself these days. So that's been the strategy, just to stay agile, to be able to adapt to the new challenges and come up with the best calculated risk and to adapt to the situation. So that's one. The second strategy is to really lean on the human aspect also. If the supply chain had been in the past very transactional relationship type of dynamics, especially a brand like us, that order can be sizable, it can be pretty transactional. Okay, I'm the buyer, you're the supplier. I think the COVID situation really tested that mentality in a sense that if there's no will from the supplier when people around them are dying, I think that you're not going to get your goods. I mean, you're not going to get your goods no matter what if there's no container, but you have a better chance of getting good product that's produced well when you can't travel to audit, when you can't travel to inspect, if you have a strong partnership. So I think that goes with also internal partners at work, but also my team who's here with me that, obviously it's such a turmoil year that tested all of us personally in our personal life. So if people didn't want to come to work and show their best work, you can't make that environment work, right? So I think what I've learned and the strategy has been that really appreciate the human resources that you have internally as well as externally within your supply chain, considering and acknowledge those partners as your extended supply chain and your team. And I think that was also the learning and the strategy that I believe worked for us.
That's great. Ronnie, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so our business is basically split into 2. We have about 20 and growing 20% of what we call owned and licensed brands that we source and produce ourselves, and then the balance is national brands. So we did 2 things. The first, on the owned and licensed side, we looked at what we call our product to market process, and we spent a lot of time, and the people in this room spent a lot of time on figuring out how can we get our calendar down from where it was so that we can anticipate better. And with the headwinds of elongated transportation times, I remember back in the 30 days was what we used to put into the matrix. Well, now it's 60 plus, depending on where you're buying from. So you can't all of a sudden say, well, let's not do something with the calendar. So the first thing we did was we looked at the calendar. We took out as much as we could on the front end, the decision-making process. What can we use instead of making samples? Can we use technology? We did a whole bunch of things around that to try to reduce down the time frame it took us before we placed an order. That was number one. And then on the national brand side, we were, our business, and if those of you that know DSW, is primarily known as a dress shoe retailer. Our business shifted. Nobody wore, I don't think, high-heeled shoes when they were sitting at home on Zoom, right? So our business shifted from dress shoes to athletic and athleisure. And we were able to, with the help of our top 20 suppliers, we got into their supply chain and started looking at what they had. So even if we had a style on order that wasn't going to be there, but they had another style, we just took it. And we put as much as we could. And that's what our customers were demanding. That's what they were asking for. And we were able, so sneaker A wasn't available, but we got sneaker B and we put it in the stores and it sold. because people wanted to buy sneakers because they wanted to be comfortable at home. So we did a couple of things. And that lesson of learning from these national brands and having my transportation and logistics teams working with theirs and having that visibility up front to say, where is the stuff? Oh, it's not available. What else have you got? Oh, we've got this. Does the buyer accept it? Absolutely. Then let's get it in. So I think we were talking about flexibility or having the ability to think and react as things change. If you have those relationships with your suppliers, both on the sourcing side and on the national brand side, then that makes all the difference, because if you can get ahead of it, they tend to say, well, let's give these guys the shoes rather than those guys the shoes because they're partnering with us.
That's great. Tom, a couple things that have helped?
Yeah, a couple of things that helped at Jones and Vining. Prior to, it was around 2018, we decided we had a wide variety of products that we were selling. Basically, we're a T2 supplier that we supply different components to the shoe manufacturers, the T1 factories in Asia. We had, outsoles, we had footbeds, we had lasts, we had insole boards, a wide variety of different products. And a lot of them we were outsourcing. We were not manufacturing them in-house. We decided in 2018 to pull everything in-house. So everything we sell to a T1 factory is made at a wholly owned Jones and Vining facility, whether it's in China, Vietnam, or Indonesia. And that was a major step, and it prepared us for this pandemic. And with all the different sourcing issues that were going on out there, we didn't have to really worry about that, because we were manufacturing the products that we were at the end selling to our customers. And at the same time, we tried to do everything in-house as far as making our own formulations, not relying on suppliers to have the specific formulations for us. We're doing it all in-house. That was the number one priority that we did. The other thing that we did is our management teams in Asia. We decided to walk away from the expat type tradition that you would see in most of the facilities in Asia and have local management teams put in place. And this changed the whole culture of our facilities. Now we had, a Vietnamese person running our Vietnam factory, and they were attracting more talented people working in our facilities. So it really helped ease us into to cope with all of these different situations and be able to maintain our business strategy.
Oh, that's great. Let's stay with you for a new question here. So supply chain traceability, I think it's on all of our minds. And as we go to more national, regional supply, it continues to evolve in terms of how hard this is going to be. So it's a critical requirement of the modern supply chain, with environmental and labor considerations top of mind. As a material and component supplier experiencing immense growth, how would you advise our companies to deal with Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 visibility and traceability? Okay.
Definitely traceability is a key. All of our facilities are GRS certified, which is Global Recycling Standards. That's for our recycled content. Basically, it's an independent firm that comes into our facilities. They do an audit to trace how much material we are actually shipping out of our facility that's going into a landfill. Basically, we're at a neutral position right now. Everything that we create waste-wise is reintroduced into a different formula of material within our organization. And that's all certified by the GRS certification process. The other key element is we're seeing more and more demand for more sustainable products. And as there's more requirements or demand for bio-based products, all of our products that we make with a bio-based ingredient can be tested by Beta Analytics, and we utilize them constantly. They're located down in Florida. If we have a finished product that we state has got a 30% bio-based content, you can take that particular product and send it to Beta Analytics and validate that. It's a very simple process to do. So those are two processes that we use. The other thing is that the brands that we're dealing with. Quite often, we welcome them to come into our facilities to do an audit of our facility. This happens on a regular basis when we're introducing a new brand into our factory or into our facility, or just a regular annual or every 2 years. They'll come in and audit our manufacturing environment to make sure that we're following all the procedures that they require for their facility. And we welcome that, and it's done on a regular basis.
No, that's great. And we've got a lot of suppliers to the industry in this room. And so at the breaks and in the time that we have together to just collaborate, let's make sure we talk about that tier 2 and tier 3 visibility, the systems to do it, but also the discipline to do it. I think it's going to be one of the big challenges here over the next really several seasons. So switching gears again. So will the E in ESG drive supply chain improvements that lessen the impact of our industry has in the environment? And will there be a more standard way to assess it? So I'm going to jump in here first, and then others can come in. So first, I would say there's been quite a bit of progress already. So when I look at the companies in this room and the disciplined approach people are taking with respect to the environmental impact of our industry and what our partners do around the world, I think there's been a real impact. I'm concerned, though, that there's just not a true convergence around a standard or a set of standards. And I think until the consumer, certainly all of us as providers, but until the consumer can have a way to evaluate and make choices, I think we're going to struggle. It tends to be a bit of the flavor of the day. Is it water? Is it carbon? Is it differing things in terms of social policies? There's all kinds of good things to do, but I think the extra intensity around having this industry have less of an E impact will come when there's a bit more standardization. And we might all have to align on that. I know there's been a ton of efforts. We're going to have a few more sessions on this in this meeting and actually in other meetings led by FDRA. But I think that's critical right now to drive more impact in terms of our environmental impact on this. But other thoughts around environmental?
Go ahead.
Yeah, obviously it's on everybody's mind, and it's become a major focal point for Jones and Vining. All of the new materials that we develop today all have to have are replacing or improving a current product with a more sustainable story, whether that's increasing the recycled content that we're generating within our manufacturing facility or increasing the bio-based content. It's something that's not going to go away. Being a polyurethane supplier, and I don't know how familiar you are with polyurethane, it's a difficult product to process, and you create a lot of waste, and we have to find a home for it, and we've been able to do that. What we're seeing now is with our efficiency in manufacturing, we're having less recycled products to be able to use within our formulations. So if a certain customer wants to have an EPM5, which is like a 50% sustainability story, we have to increase the bio-based content, lower the recycled content. That's just the way of the future. So we're working more and more with bio-based, replacing the fossil fuels that are being utilized in the formulations with plant-grown bio-based products. And that's the way of the future for as far as what we're looking at right now.
Ronnie or Jung, other thoughts on environmental?
I mean, I think this is the single biggest issue we have going forward. This and sustainability, and I guess they're probably the same thing. I was at a Deloitte conference a couple of weeks ago, and they don't know what the SEC requirements are going to be. So your point on standardization is really important. But my thought on this is that you've got to pick a lane. What do you want to stand for in terms of your company? I was at J. Crew. We picked a lane on water because we had a lot of denim production, and we thought that was our big issue. That's not a big issue for us at DSW. So what is a big issue? Is it the raw materials? I personally think it's the end of use of the shoes, and how do we get to that point and be able to put something in the ground and 30 minutes later, I'm exaggerating, 30 days later, it's disappeared. And that's the goal, I think, for most footwear suppliers. How do we get to that point? But there's so much confusion, and there's so many ways of measuring, and there's no real clarity on things. And there's a lot of people made a lot of statements out there in the industry that are like wild and fanciful in my mind, at least. How do you prove any of that stuff? And it's one thing saying in 2050, we're going to do this. Well, that's great, because I'm not going to be there in 2050. I'm going to be on a beach somewhere. But the rest of the people that inherit this have got to figure out how to do that. And so I think it's a very tough situation, but I think it's critical. I think this is going to be the biggest issue. But at the Deloitte conference, they were talking about a bottle of Bud Light. Does everybody know how many calories is in a bottle of Bud Light? Roughly 120, I'd guess, right? The cost of a bottle of Bud Light, $1.50. What's the most popular beer in America? The Bud Light. But if somebody says, what's the carbon footprint of a Bud Light, nobody would know the answer to that question. That is going to be where we're going to have to go to within the next 5 years. We're going to have to pick up this shoe and say the carbon footprint on this shoe is X. That's going to be it's going to be on the label, I think. And so we better start doing it now, because trust me, it's going to creep up on us and we're going to have to do it.
Yeah, great point.
Definitely agree with both Ronnie and Jim. Just wanted to add that, I mean, overall, it's a great movement that our industry is faced with and challenged with, but we're also embracing all of the efforts. I think there is definitely going to be a benefit of some standardized way of measuring it. And I say that only because when the measuring methods are not clear, I think some people who are already doing a great job can be penalized based on a certain way of measuring, but not everyone's reading all the fine prints. So recently, there have been publication about, some media about how they rate things, right? But this is particular organization, how they decided to rate all these brands and companies. And the criteria, number one, was based on public statements only. So let's say, I'm just using that as an example, I'm not singling anyone out, but if that kind of criteria is a foundation of how you rate them, if someone is not a public company or doing something silently already to do a good job, I think it's not servicing that particular brand or motivating them to continue to do so. They may find out what the loopholes are, what the rating systems are, and now you're having to gauge the system, which I think hurts the industry in overall improvement as an industry and the community. So I just wanted to add that point.
No, that's great. It's a big one to solve for. I know it's an area of a lot of effort from the FDRA and other industry groups, so it's going to be a big one for us. Ronnie, I'm going to come back to you. So we heard Matt talk about inflation. So inflation continues to be a challenge in the American economy. Increased supply chain costs are certainly a large part of that inflationary environment that we find ourselves in. What, if any, mitigating strategies are you deploying right now to keep your costs lower?
So on the sourcing side, the old way that we used to do sourcing is used to ask people what's the price of this shoe. Well, now we are asking what's the cost of this shoe, and we are now dissecting literally every component we can to be able to go and say this shoe should cost this. And so we've literally been learning we've hired new people in Asia who understand costing and looking at component costing. We're literally, many of you may have already done this, so this is not rocket science, but we've started to do that, number one, to try drive down our first cost AUC. On the supply chain side, we've diversified our delivery agents. We've brought in new people for our direct-to-consumer business to compete in the environment with the big guys. We've moved to regional carriers, which has made a big difference to us. And we've got to we just opened a new East Coast. Well, it was an old building, but we just put a new East Coast logistics center, and where we put in a bunch of robotics that has saved us 100 people on an annual basis in terms of picking and packing our merchandise. And if you look at what's going on with labor, you've got to start thinking along those lines. You've got to take hands out of the mix because the labor market is so tough, and it's only going to get worse, in my opinion, given inflation. I don't know if we're going to be in a recession or what this is going to do, but the reality is costs are going up significantly, and somehow or other you've got to offset that, especially when you're trying, as Matt said earlier, you're trying to comp last year's numbers. Well, you're comping last year's numbers, and your supply chain costs are much higher than they were last year. It's one thing taking out 5% of the cost, but if you're getting goods to stores or consumers has gone up by 15 or 20%, that doesn't really help you, or it helps you a little bit. So I think it's looking at dissecting every area that you can, going after opportunities where you can. It's interesting. We're celebrating a container cost of $7,500, right? Which is still 2.5 times what it used to be back in the day for the last 40 years or whatever it was. So, but we're all getting excited about paying $7,500 for a container that used to cost $20,000 plus, right? So it will get better, but I don't know if it will ever go back to the days where they were. I think there'll be a new normal. And I think you've just got to literally dissect everything you can in your business and look for ways to be able to take cost out without, hopefully, having to do the draconian measures and cut people, which none of us want to do.
That's great. I'll probably keep us moving along here. Jung, maybe a question for you, and we'll hit this later today from some true experts, but I think it'd be good to get a view here. Port congestion. So still an issue for you. Ports provide an update to our members every single week. seems to be abating a bit. We saw some of the numbers here in Matt's slides. Kind of what's your perspective, and have you diversified ports or still West Coast heavy? Kind of what's been your approach?
Correct. So we've definitely diversified. I mean, we've had diversified model already, but we're definitely leaning on it more than before. So we plan to continue, although the port congestion has eased. I think everyone has learned from the COVID and the port congestion in LA that having a risk mitigation plan is always the best strategy, even during the times that are better than before, because we've learned that there can be additional unknowns. So as we have conversations around contracts, in LA, it happens every year. Some years are more, more challenging than others, but those little nuances and challenges have always been there about union negotiation or the policies around expansion, automation. And so I think the goal is to have plan for mitigation. And so we continue to have diverse strategy.
Oh, that's great. Last question for everybody. Then we've got some point counterpoint areas we're going to hit. So last question, pretty simple in kind of short words. Let's fast forward just 1 year. So 12 months out, what will be easier in supply chain and what will be more challenging? So easier and more challenging. Tom, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to 2023. 2022 has been a challenging year, mostly impacted by what happened in 2021, feeling the ramp up of, the shutdown in Vietnam that happened around this time last year. We are feeling the repercussions of that all through 2022, and it's been put a lot of strain on our facilities, on our manufacturing. Our major customers were pulling orders ahead, especially in Indonesia and Vietnam, and it was very difficult to keep up with that. So we're hoping that it was a good thing to have, a good problem to have. Put a lot of strain on us. We were air shipping shipments, and there was a lot of difficult times that we had to work through in 2022 because of what happened in 2021. So hopefully 2023 will be a little bit more balanced.
That's great. Ronnie, easier, harder?
Easier. I think inventory management will be easier. I think the supply chain and the vendors will have figured out how to fit it into whatever the new normal is. I think that will get easier. And harder, I think, is going to continue to be labor costs. I think labor costs are going to continue to rise, and that's going to put a challenge on our costs in various supply chain facilities.
That's great. Jung?
I think we're going to be suffering from PTSD, all of us. No, just kidding. I hope that things improve. I think we're looking in the right track. But, there's a lot of uncertainties in this world. So I think what I'm worried about the most is about what is the picture of civil unrest look like? What is the global poverty situation look like? What is the inflation in not only USA as a market, but just globally in each region in general? Because right now the fuel price, the way it is, let's say it continues, hopefully not, but let's say it's leading into the next year and that's the prediction. If that's the case, I think that due to the inflation globally, the market will shrink in terms of disposable income. So that concerns, but also in the manufacturing region, if they have an inflation, and like Sri Lanka, what we have seen, if there's a civil unrest, that can be a manufacturing base for certain brands, and then they should be concerned. And so I think this macro situation will continue to be a grave concern. And if things really improve and there's no macro or micro challenges to the degree that we're talking about now, I think the minor side of concern can be that the agile supply chain that we had deployed strategically for the past 2-3 years probably is not the most cost-efficient supply chain, because it's designed to mitigate the risk as a priority, not so much to be the cheapest. So I think that could be a smaller challenge in trying to find the right balance.
No, and I would just say easier capacity, whether that's ocean freight, whether that's factory capacity. You saw some of the numbers Matt showed, like there's going to be excess capacity. And harder, I think, our expectations. I think what's going to be expected in terms of timeliness of supply chain, costing of supply chain, I think, and environmental issues, actually. I think the second some pressure comes off, I think there's a ton of new pressure that's going to come on just in terms of expectations. So. So next part of the panel discussion, we're going to do a bit of point counterpoint. So I'm going to put some issues out there, and these folks are going to talk about one side or the other. Does not necessarily reflect their personal views on these topics. As Jung was just saying, though, I mean, there is an agility that's required in supply chain right now. And so honestly, you have to be able to take a couple different sides on things. Even if your personal opinion would say differently, we've had to diversify. So this could be a little bit interesting. So let's talk China first. And so we saw the data that Matt presented on China footwear exports to the U.S. continue to surge in comparison to Vietnam. The trend of Vietnam had dominated our industry before that. So Jung, tell us why this emerging China trend will stay. And then Tom's going to jump in and tell us why this is going to subside and Vietnam's going to come back and overtake the growth leader here again. So Jung, China as a dominant player.
I love how we can argue both sides, all of us in one seating, but I am specifically speaking about why I believe China may stay. We've learned that all decisions need to be situational and pretty agile based on the moment in time. So, we always say that there's a decision-making triangle where fast, cheap, good, right? And everything needs to be either you want it fast or you want it cheap or you want it good. And you constantly have to strive for the best of the three, right? So it depends on the brand, depends on what is the most important to you, what type of risk do you want to take? I think all of that bring to decisions. So if I were to say that China is here to stay, I think for certain brands who really value fashion and speed to market, China is where all the little components and toolings are already available in market, regardless of the brand. So I think for the brands that are either small, doesn't have a lot of resources to develop their own tooling and pay for that, they may want to leverage what's out there already. And the country to find the most in one place to put together a nice shoe is China right now. So if you are a brand that really values speed to market and quick design, trendy item, and you don't really commit to the tooling cost and the minimums, I think China is the country still. So yes, you're paying for a punitive tariff, but maybe the customer is willing to pay full price if you deliver trendy items. So these are all the pros and cons that you weigh to make decisions. And so I do think that for certain brands and certain situations, China would stay.
Great. Counterpoint, Tom, why is Vietnam going to come roaring back?
Yeah, I mean, we're in both countries, China and Vietnam, and China was, the leading country for us for many, many years. We've seen it shift to Vietnam. China's become more difficult to work, to manufacture in. They have more restrictions on your manufacturing processes. The cost of making products in China has risen dramatically. Duties, a lot of different factors come into play, but also the geopolitical situation in China. Who knows what's going to happen in China? So we're still in China, but we look at China as being a market where they're going to service their own domestic market more than exporting products in the future. That's what we feel. And Vietnam has really come on strong. Prior to the pandemic, we saw a lot of we're very strong in the athletic brands, working with the athletic brands. We saw a lot of the product development shift to Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City, and even up in Hanoi. And a lot of the T1 factories in Vietnam are very capable of making the products that they could never make in the past. And that's not going to change. We see more and more product development coming out of Vietnam today and not China. So we feel that we're very bullish on Vietnam right now.
It's great. Two more counterpoint questions. Tom and I are going to do this one. With COVID, our industry has been pushed towards the adoption of digital automation tools for design, development, and production. So I'm going to take the side of the fact that we're not ready for even more enhanced digital, and Tom will argue for we are absolutely ready for the advancement of digital. From my standpoint, I see the brands more ready for this than what our factory base is. They have skilled trades to an extent that it's hard to find in the U.S. anymore. They had people on the ground at these factories doing development during COVID. Many of us didn't. I think we were all talking about brand conferences over the past 24 months with very few shoes sometimes, or just pictures and things. And so I think the brand side of the industry is ready. and I know there's vendors in the room here that really focus on this. I don't know that the factory side is ready to move at that pace. It could be that we've not all pushed them fast enough, hard enough, or that we're not so deliberative on it. We still have the second rail. We still have the physical sample. We still have the 11 and a half turns with our partners in Asia that we can fall back on. And so in COVID, some of those things went away and we got really good. Right now, I could argue that we're actually going to be slow to continue that progress for the next little bit. But Tom, why is digital going to surge?
Yeah, I think COVID has forced it. I mean, we've become more digital. I mean, things are done online today like we've never seen before. And from a last perspective, it's amazing. The last is the most important ingredient in shoe manufacturing and product development. And what we can do to supply product development teams with the tools that they need to develop products virtually is amazing. The 3D software available today is so advanced. We can provide all the different sections of the last that they need to incorporate all the different products that they have to manufacture for that shoe, whether it's a counter, a tongue, an outsole, a footbed. All of that can be extracted right off of the last virtually, and they can basically make a virtual prototype. I was in your offices a couple of months ago, or about a month ago, and we sent a 3D file of the last. They didn't even have to make a last. They 3D printed the last to do a pullover right there while we were actually in the office. It was pretty amazing. That's the product development part of it, and it's going to eventually filter down into production also.
It's kind of a shoe dog thing, but it circulates Wolverine Worldwide. The last comes first. That's right. So just kind of there. Last point, counterpoint that I wanted to hit, and then we'll do a speed round. So for Ronnie and Jung, Matt showed us some slides here. American footwear inventory positions are getting elevated. They've recovered and actually are getting elevated. Jung, tell us why this is a good thing for our consumers and our brands, and then Ronnie's going to take why these elevated inventory levels are going to be a significant challenge for the next foreseeable future. So, Jung?
I think I have a harder side of the argument. I don't know if anyone would say having a lot of inventory is good, but I will say that at least we don't have to struggle to try to get the goods here. You know, I think what we've learned during COVID is that even if the goods are not the most desirable, having the inventory was better than not having the inventory, right? So in that sense, we have it, so that's great. The second thing is, I think for the consumer in the end, I think they have more choices because we have, all the brands and, there are more product to choose from. And I think that perhaps, when there's a lot of inventory, if it's not sold through fast enough, maybe there's more room for negotiation and discounts. And so I think for customers, I think this is a good thing to have more choices and options.
Ronnie?
So first CEO I worked for told me the two rules in retail: never run out of cash, never have too much inventory. That's the key. And so this is a unmitigated disaster, I think, personally. Most of we have outside customers that we deliver to as well. They're not accepting deliveries into their distribution centers anymore. We're having to drop ship to the customers and stuff that we normally would send to them. Or they're just canceling or asking us to pack and hold orders. There's a glut of inventory that has to get sold before anybody starts buying again. And that means that there's going to be massive opportunity for the customer base in terms of markdowns and deals that are going to be going on for a long time. Once that happens and things normalize, I think we'll get back to where we should be. But that first and foremost is people are going to have too much inventory and they have to get rid of it somehow. And I think it's going to be, depending on your brand, if you've got a hot brand, you'll be fine. But if you're a big department store and you've got a lot of stuff to sell, it's going to be a tough fall.
That $20 Shoe Carnival card might go longer than you think. Speed round. So kind of one-word answers. We're going to kind of finish up with some kind of hot questions, and this team will just weigh in almost like yes or no or a quick answer. So the first one is Western Hemisphere production. There's some industry players in the crowd here from various Western Hemisphere choices. So Western Hemisphere production, yes or no? Jung? One word.
Yes. Yeah.
Ronnie?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I believe so also, yeah.
Same. So we're 4 for 4 on that one. So Western Hemisphere, yes. I think we can all kind of think about the reasons why. We'll get into some of those throughout the week this week or the day today. Made in America, will it ever exceed 5% of production for the United States? Tom?
Unfortunately, not. I mean, we had, it's kind of just more than one word.
We'll allow it. The floor, but we have minutes to concede.
We maintained 2 manufacturing facilities right up until 2020, hoping that the shoe industry would come back. There is always going to be some footwear made here in the United States, very compliant products for the U.S. military. We all know what New Balance does as far as they're basically putting shoes together, bringing in uppers and outsoles. So there is going to be that component. But the major obstacle is the source, the supply chain here in the U.S. It's all disappeared. When the manufacturing job, when the production left the U.S., the sourcing sector of it left also. And that's the biggest challenge. You can have all the best equipment in the world and the best employees, but if you have to import all the products to manufacture the shoes, it's just not going to work.
Ronnie, yes or no?
I'd say no, but with a caveat. I don't know where robotics is going, but if it continues at this pace, it's possible that you can find robots to make shoes. That's a possibility, and if that happens, then I do think there's no, because I think you can solve the supply chain issue. You can have product come in and sit, but you can't solve right now the how do you make a shoe problem. So if robotics or whatever else, other technology comes in, but at this stage, I'd say no.
Jung?
Can I say depends? I think that it really depends on 2 things. I mean, definitely agree. One is not only the component and the supply chain, but you can argue that you can bring those in. You can air it in, boat it in, and you assemble here, even if you don't manufacture every single component. Okay. But I think the key part of putting together any kind of consumer product is the labor force. You really need labor force who are willing to work in factory job at any kind of cost, any kind of salary, right? So, I think that that was a really great point, because I think tougher job that people don't want to do, robots or, machines can help it. But in anything that you do need human touch, right? So I have an 18-year-old daughter who's going to college. If I were to say, hey, do you want to work at a factory? I don't know if she'll say yes. And that's a true answer for a lot of American labor force today. They care about the environment that they work in. They care about what kind of job that they want. Manufacturing job is today not exactly the most desired job. And I think that is the true challenge of manufacturing in USA. So that is a key issue. Yes, it's possible if we have labor forces, American labor forces who are willing to work. And I think brand desire is there. And then the second thing is the consumer in terms of willing to pay for made in America. Clearly, let's say if my daughter who's 18, if she works at a factory, she would demand minimum wage at least and whatever. And so let's say to put together the shoe would be, exponentially more expensive. And so then I would also look at her as a consumer. Would you then, with your allowance and your salary as a 20-year-old, would you buy that shoe made in America next to the other one that you can actually afford when you really need the shoe to go to work? I think this is a true choice that American people contend with, and that it's not really a wrong or bad or moral decision sometimes. It's really a financial decision where when you have 3 kids, you're a single mom, like how much money do you have to buy? So I think that it all depends. People are willing to buy the shoes that are, let's say, $200 that could easily be $30 or not. And at the factory, who's going to work all day long, 2 shifts?
Totally agree. I agree with all these comments. I don't think it'll exceed 5%. I think it's just going to be a steep uphill. 3 speed round questions to go. Will China make more or less than 20% of the world's shoe production 5 years from now? More or less? Ronnie?
More.
Jung?
Less? Well, you know what? To export, maybe not, but to produce, including producing for China market, then yes.
Good point. Tom?
I say less.
I also say less. 2 questions to go. Will a drone deliver a pair of shoes to a consumer in the next 12 months? So 12 months. Jung?
Maybe yes in pockets, but not as a norm. I don't think.
You don't like these definitive black and white answers. I can say, this is very interesting. Yes,
That's
maybe.
how I build the agile supply chain.
Okay, I like that.
Committing to one or the other.
Ronnie, yes, no, or it depends?
I think yes. I think shoebox is a perfect thing for a drone to pick up, and now maybe not 2 shoeboxes, but one. Yes, absolutely.
So you've got a yes for 1 shoebox and no for 2 shoeboxes. Just to be serious, can we jot that down when we're scorekeeping at home? I don't know. It's like a bunt single or something. I don't know what that is. Tom?
Yeah, I believe so also. It might be a return from somebody, but yeah, I think we'll be seeing some shoes delivered by drones.
Let's hope it's not a return. Hands up in the crowd. Delivery by drone within the next 12 months, yes or no? Yes? Already happened. There we go. All right. Last one. Will a consumer 3D print shoes at home in the next 10 years? Tom?
Definitely. But I think they're not going to be shoes that are performance related or real comfort related. There'll be more, casual type shoes like sandals, clogs, shoes of that nature that could be made out of plastics that don't have to have as precise fit. Hopefully, because we're in the last business.
Ronnie?
I mean, yes, but I think it's going to be very niche and not mass. And to the points that Tom just said, I think, ultimately, I'm not sure what are these things going to look like and how are they going to fit and how are they going to, it might be a nice thing to do, but I think people are still going to want Adidas personally.
Got it. Jung?
I would say yes. Just in general, that's where it's going, where, if you can design in 3D and if the technology becomes affordable, I don't see why not. Like rent a runway kind of, where you can kind of ship the whole packet of 3D printer and designer. At home, you can upload the file to perhaps print. I think it's possible.
That's great. And I think there might be upgradable or customizable things that people will do at home a lot, whether it's sizing or adjustments or some type of embellishment that will be heavier at home. So, Matt, I'm checking time. We're just about on time. Do we want to take some questions or should we?
Questions from the audience. We have mics that are roaming around.
All right. So you've got all the experts to my left, your right. So we've got time for a couple questions if anybody has any that they would like us to tap on. Uh-oh.
I have okay. What do you guys think about the automated trucks that we're starting to see more and more to deal with the trucker shortage that's increasingly happening? Are we going to see, is that going to be a norm that we see as more of this automation across the supply chain? We see it a lot in the warehouses, but
I think it's inevitable. When you have a labor force that's shrinking and a consumer demand that's increasing, there has to be a fix for it. Now, I don't know what happens the first time there's an accident with one of those things. Something happens, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen, but I think it's inevitable.
The labor pool for our current truck drivers isn't that great, so I think I'll take automation as they continue to do this. But I think it will become more prevalent. I really do. I think the cities and the infrastructure are going to have to find a way to accommodate it in some way over time. Another question? Any second question? All right. Well, I would just want to wrap just to say thank you to my fellow panelists. Thanks for all your questions today.
Thank you, Jim.
And Matt, thank you.
So you can see from that episode why we wanted to provide this to you, to have Jim and Jung and Ronnie and Tom talking about all the different variables that are impacting the industry. We talk about how there's a multitude of once-in-a-lifetime variables impacting the industry all at once. There's like 4 of them, right? So it's war and famine and supply chain chaos and a global pandemic, all into an inflation, all kind of wrapped up into one. And Jim did such a good job of guiding the conversation and then developing this counterpoint on a variety of issues around sourcing and supply chain that I think was really insightful. And so that's why we wanted to do this long form version of Shoe In today as we close out the summer. We hope you found value in it. To listen to all of our episodes, all you need to do is go to shoeinshow.com or subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts. We have a super active and busy fall. We have a lot in store for our guests who are coming on, so stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe where you get your podcasts so it's automatically downloaded to your phone or to your device by Monday of the work week. And if there are ideas or guests or concepts or stories you want us to cover on the program, hit us up at shoeinshow.com. There's actually an icon there where you can record a message for us, and if it's compelling enough, we will play it on the air. And so do that if that's of interest to you. Thanks again for listening in, and until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.